I think their influence will emerge from two factors. One is the democratic culture of Iran. Iran, like Turkey, can become a magnet for other countries. I think there's a reason why, for example, in Egypt, there's almost no coverage of the Iranian protest demonstrations on TV. Because the Egyptian government doesn't want to give people the idea that, hey, take a look at what's happening in Iran. Iran is so much more developed than we are. When they have a fraudulent election, they pour onto the streets to protest. This is not a message that President Mubarak wants to give to the people of Egypt. So I think that democratic culture is inspirational, and I do think that ultimately it will help reshape the government of Iran, and that will be a great source of influence. But I'd like to add one other factor. When you look at a map of the Middle East, the first thing that jumps out at you is that Iran is the big country in the middle. You cannot have regional security arrangements without Iran. You know, it's actually analogous somewhat to the situation of Germany after World War II. If you look at a map of Europe, Germany is the big country right in the middle. After World War II, a lot of people were very caught up with emotions anti-Germany because of what Germany had done. And that's when we produced this so-called Morgenthau Plan. So Germany was going to be taken apart. No factory was ever going to be allowed to be built in Germany. It was only going to be allowed to become an agricultural country. And this was actually our policy for several months until cooler heads prevailed. And then we replaced the Morgenthau Plan with the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan's idea was, in order to stabilize Germany, which is a country that's caused so much trouble for its neighbors over such a long time, you want to embrace Germany. You want to bring Germany into the regional security alliances. You want to integrate Germany with the region. And that policy has been a huge success. This is what we should follow with Iran. Iran and Israel are the two players that are always left in the corner when it comes to regional security arrangements. Those countries are essential to regional security. So until they are brought in, there's not going to be any regional security. Yes? Yes.
But and then you also mentioned that our relationship with Israel currently isn't necessarily the one that we should be having due to the relationship with Turkey and Iran that is more desirable. But how do you foresee the U.S. government, I don't want to say taking a step back from Israel, but maybe removing the umbrella that we have over it a little bit and remaining in good terms with the very large, very powerful pro-Israel lobby here in the United States?
Well, you raise a very profound and important question. Not being in government, I'm able to be a little bit more visionary and radical than some other people. I can tell you, though, that I was in Israel working on research for my forthcoming book last year, and I was surprised at how many people told me if we're ever going to make peace with the Palestinians, it's going to have to be imposed from outside. Because we can't do it. Our political system is not geared towards this. And neither Israeli nor Palestinian society has the psychological, political, or institutional resources to make peace. Wars only end when one side or both sides are tired of fighting. In the Israel-Palestine conflict, neither side is tired of fighting. They've been doing it for 60 years, and they are ready to go for another 60 years. So unless something is imposed from the outside, I don't see how there's ever going to be a resolution for that. Or there has to be something equally dramatic. So if an American president, in concert with other world leaders, were to decide to use all methods of pressure at our disposal, then I think there would be a possibility to force a settlement there over the complaints of both sides. And this would give an Israeli prime minister, as well as a Palestinian leader, an excuse that they don't now have, which is they could say, I hate doing this, but we have to do it. Now, one of the reasons I think that this is an interesting approach is that, unlike many other world crises, we have a pretty good idea what the end is going to be for the Israel-Palestine problem. We just can't get there. We know that there's going to be two states, and Jerusalem will be divided, and it'll be the capital of both states. and that the Palestinians will have the right of return to Palestinian territories, but not to Israel, and they will be compensated, and most of the settlements will be removed from the West Bank, and there will be some compensation for the other land. Basically, the outlines of the long-term future are clear, but we just can't get there, given the fact that we know what the end is, and given the fact that this crisis is now so dangerous for the whole world. A powerful group of world leaders might want to consider what I think would be the only imaginable approach for peace, and that would be to try to force both sides to do something that maybe some people on both sides realize deep down inside they need to do, but without an outside dynamic, it will never happen.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So when you say force them, I mean, I hear maybe sanctions. Like that's when I think of forcing a nation to do something, it's economic sanctions. But do you see Congress actually allowing that? I mean, or do you see Obama or the president that decides to step up and do that?
I don't think it would necessarily require sanctions. I'm not a fan of sanctions. I've watched sanctions work, and I see that they don't. We are providing such lavish aid to Israel and also to Egypt and other players in that part of the world that a concerted American effort, it would have to be something that was bipartisan, which I don't think is achievable at this moment, and it would have to be one that would have international support, which I think is out there. If an American president were to go into a room determined to pound on the table and squeeze appendages and use all of the tools at his disposal, those are quite considerable tools. And I think, although at this moment I don't think we have the political capital in Washington to do it, it should be part of our goal to get to the point where we do have that capital. Yes, in the back.
You mentioned that Iran is a country that shares similar democratic values that we do. But how would you link that into the fact that Hillary Clinton recently stated that the current political establishment is being supplanted by the power of the Revolutionary Guards? And how does that affect the United States' goals in eventually decreasing tension?
Well, the question of whether the Revolutionary Guards are more influential or the Ayatollahs are more influential or this faction or that faction are more influential has to do with what's going on at the top of Iranian politics. I don't see that as a reflection of Iran's democratic culture. I see actually the larger majority of Iranians as representing that culture. So I don't think that we should place our hopes in the possibility of an alliance in the very short term. But I also believe that if we realize over the long run that this is something we want to do, that should shape our policy in the interim. For example, we have to realize that anything that is seen by Iranians as an attack on them, whether it's a military attack or sanctions that make Iranian people suffer, are going to weaken our ability to become a partner of Iran in the future. Once we decide that this is a good idea, then we can start to think about what are our policies to get there. So I don't think that the machinations at the top really affect this. As a matter of fact, I think that they increase the anger that and frustration that ordinary Iranians feel, and perhaps even bring closer the day when the Iranian political culture that the majority of Iranians embrace will actually be able to express itself in government. Yes?
In the beginning of your speech, you mentioned briefly that Obama hadn't focused his energy on relations between Cuba and other
Yes.
American countries. Why do you think that is? And do you think that that will change in the next year?
Well, let me answer the second part first, because that's the easier part. Will it change in the next year? What would be the reason for Obama to make a dramatic change in relations with Cuba in the second year that wasn't there in the first year? Maybe the day after Fidel Castro dies? Could you take advantage of that? That might be an option.